Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a moment. All right. Everyone, welcome to the 2021 EarthLab Showcase. My name is Constance McGarren. I'm the Communications and Engagement Lead at EarthLab, and I will be your moderator for the next hour. EarthLab envisions an equitable, just, and sustainable world where people and planet thrive. We deliver on this vision by pushing boundaries to develop innovative, just, and equitable solutions to environmental challenges, with a growing focus on climate change and its relationship to social justice. Part of how we show our commitment to equity and justice is by acknowledging the land that we are on. So EarthLab recognizes that we are in the land where numerous tribal communities have lived since time immemorial. We acknowledge the Coast Salish people of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. If you are not joining us from this region, we encourage you to learn about the land you're on at native-land.ca. So today you will hear 5-minute lightning round style presentations from people and teams connected to EarthLab, either through our member organizations or grants program. I will be popping back onto the screen to transition and introduce each presentation and speaker. This presentation is being recorded and will be shared on our website. And to start us off, I would like to introduce you to Ben Packard, the Harriet Bullitt Endowed Executive Director of EarthLab, who will share a short introduction about our organization. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Constance. And before we get into the lightning, I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here with us as we celebrate just a small fraction of the amazing achievements and stories of impact coming out of the EarthLab communities. This year has been nuts, we all know that, and I couldn't be prouder to be part of this team that, despite the hardships and disruption of the last year, you've all shown such amazing dedication and resilience as we continue to work towards an equitable and sustainable world. For those of you who might be new to EarthLab, I wanted to provide some context for today's presentation. EarthLab is a visionary institute at the University of Washington that brings together communities, businesses, nonprofits, public agencies, tribal nations, academia, and so many others to co-produce actionable research that generates solutions to our most pressing environmental challenges. We leverage the strength of UW's academic units by supporting faculty, researchers, and staff and students involved to do two things that universities have not historically done well: collaborate across disciplines and apply our research. We currently support and amplify 8 member organizations that are each focused on distinct, complex environmental issues. Our support helps them scale so they can do what they do best: focus on the research, collaboration, and impact. EarthLab also supports new collaborations through our innovation grants program, taking risks on high impact ideas that deliver big results. We've been told by the University of Washington researchers time and again that this program addresses a large hole in the current funding environment regarding applied and community-led research. This radical approach is building bridges across campus and in the community to address these most pressing environmental challenges. And we all do this with a potent mix of optimism, collaboration across disciplines and sectors, respect for multiple knowledge systems, and a commitment to deliver on President Kelsey's stated objective for the University of Washington to be #1 in the world as measured by impact. But don't take my word for it. You're going to hear from 8 presenters now, or teams, who are going to share their story of impact this year. I'm going to give it back to Constance now, who's going to introduce you to our first speaker. Thank you again.
Our first presenter is Leo Hummel. He is from the Nippon Foundation Ocean Nexus Center. And Leo is here to discuss his project called Sea Weaver. So Leo, I will hand it off to you to share with us your project. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, and I am sharing my screen presenting. Does this look okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my name is Leo Hummel. I am an industrial designer, and I joined Ocean Nexus at the end of last year to develop my project Sea Weaver, which is to develop marine permaculture structures for supporting the growth of seaweed forests and other coastal ecosystems. The problem that this project addresses is the decline of seaweed forest ecosystems. The entire west coast of the Americas has historically had lush seaweed forests, but many of these areas have seen almost a total disappearance in these ecosystems over recent years. And these ecosystems are hugely important, so their disappearance is really devastating both to local and larger global ocean ecosystems. And there are many contributing factors to this decline. A lot of them can be attributed to human activities, and especially notable is overgrazing by sea urchins, whose natural predators like otters, sea stars, and large coastal fish all face existential threats. When it comes to growing seaweeds, there are large established efficient industries in place that can be drawn from. So farmed seaweeds are typically grown from single ropes and take their nutrients and light needs naturally from the environment. And this means that in terms of land usage, human labor, and money, seaweed farming has big advantages and benefits over other agriculture and aquaculture practices. However, growing single crop is not an ecosystem. So because seaweed is grown away from the seafloor and removed seasonally, there's little interaction with local wildlife. And also the carbon captured by the seaweed crop is used by humans and remains in the carbon cycle. So seaweed farming can be summarized as temporary monoculture structures oriented toward crop harvest. And what Sea Weaver aims to do is take the advantages of rope growing methods from seaweed farming and employ them in long-term structures whose purpose is to aid the ecosystem in which they're installed, and thereby hopefully incurring the positive aspects of seaweed forest ecosystems, such as biodiversity and carbon sequestration. So seaweed farming shares its core element of the rope with the diverse craft of weaving. Seaweed will grow from a rope, which means it will also grow from a surface woven out of rope. During my industrial design master's at Georgia Tech, I focused on parametric modular design. One of my main mentors during that time was Professor Lisa Marks, who is a world leader in computational and algorithmic weaving. So studying under her, I learned about what weaving can do, not just representing forms, but also in dynamic functionality and programmability. So for the development of this project, I've explored a variety of woven patterns. One pattern in particular, which is the bobbin lace ground stitch pattern shown here, has a very attractive combination of qualities. It's high strength, low stretch. It's got tightly interwoven strands, which reduces risks of unraveling. And it's woven without hand tools like needles or hooks, which means it can be used with scaled up materials. So I'm looking at the parameters of the pattern symmetry type, which allows me to apply it over non-rectangular shapes. And then I can use those geometries as mesh data to simulate digital models in a variety of structures. Here's some images of the weaving process that I've done. It's woven over a blueprint. Here's a completed structure and then a live model that I put into a small aquarium with live plants and fish as a display model. I'm focusing on a round configuration for a few reasons. All sides of this conical shape have the same sloping geometry, which means that lateral tidal forces from any direction won't catch on the body of the weave, and the risk of becoming dislodged is reduced. And also this configuration creates a hollow interior space that's protected a little bit, which is exactly the kind of space that all sorts of marine wildlife seek out for shelter and food and reproduction. So it's not just providing substrate for the seaweed to grow from, but also encouraging the rest of the ecosystem to inhabit it as well. Just to quickly address several of the other more technical aspects of this type of structure. The species focus are the two large ecosystem building kelps, which are giant kelp in the warmer waters of California and Mexico, and bull kelp in the cooler waters of Pacific Northwest all the way up to Alaska. For rope seeding processes, there are several possibilities. There are operations in North Europe which have developed some topical spore solution methods which can be sprayed onto a completed structure. And other possibilities are interwoven beads which can be impregnated with spores in a lab and then let those spread to the rest of the structure naturally over time. This structure is quite strong and resilient to damage, but there's always a risk of the entire thing getting dislodged and swept away. So redundant anchoring with both weighted and penetrating anchors will probably be necessary to ensure it stays in place. And And lastly, it's not just kelp forest ecosystems that could benefit from this sort of structure. In tropical waters, coral reef systems are also under threat. So by using different materials, this structure could make a good artificial reef. Specifically, there's a process called mineral accretion electrolysis, which is shown to greatly increase coral health and growing speed, and could easily be integrated into seaweaver structure that's woven from something like a flexible steel cable. So that's sort of just a quick 5 minutes on my project Seaweaver. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Leo. Really appreciate that. Who would have thought industrial designer would have such a place at a Center for Ocean Equity? I love it. So we are going to stay in the oceans for a moment for our next presentation. And that is by Jan Newton, one of the 2 co-directors for the Washington Ocean Acidification Center. So we call this WOAC, and WOAC lives here at the EarthLab at the UW, but it serves all of Washington State by leading priority areas of ocean acidification research. So Jan, go for it, take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So yes, it's my pleasure to talk on behalf of Terry Klinger, myself, and all of our partners who I'll show you on the last slide. Excuse me. Oh, that's clever. To talk about ocean acidification. And specifically for this group, I wanted to focus on what we're doing with respect to biology, but we are the science to support Washington's response, both in terms of the legislature and the advisory bodies. Okay, so what I'd like to do really quickly is to play part of a video that was made for us by the American Geophysical Union Thought Leadership Series. So I'm just going to play a portion that's Parker McCready, an oceanographer, talking about the live ocean model that he developed and fashioned as part of the Washington OAF Center effort. And then also Leonard Forsman, who is the chair of the Suquamish tribe, talking about their use of the science. So let me switch to the web and play this.
Live ocean modeling is a component of the Washington Ocean Acidification Center's strategy for dealing with ocean, because it gives short-term forecasts of the chemistry of the water in the estuaries where people grow oysters that are affected by ocean acidification. Specifically, the live ocean program is looking to predict what's called a aragonite saturation state inside the estuaries. I would say that, one interesting thing for me about live ocean is it connects to a number of different stakeholders. For the ocean acidification specifically, it's largely about oyster growers. For the dissolved oxygen levels, the people who host crabs, indigenous crab, coastal water, especially the tribes.
Suquamish lived marine adaptation. We didn't live on the major rivers, so our people traveled far and wide in canoes to harvest salmon, harvest crab, and then waited on the tides to go out and harvest clams and blue ducks and other sea life to support our way of life. Our name Suquamish means the people who clear salt water. So their identity is tied into the marine environment. Ocean acidification is an issue of great concern to us. And we're doing our best to try to educate people about the fact that we need to make big changes. And I really believe that it's in our best long-term interests. And we need to get people to understand that we need to coexist and work together with the marine system that we live upon. It looks so beautiful from the surface, but there's a lot of impacts under the surface that we need to make sure are not going to damage the level of life that Seattle so greatly described and made a priority to Isaac Stevens and Treaty 1.0.
Okay, now I'm going to switch back to the slide. Thanks for your patience with that. But I thought that no one could say it better than those two individuals. One with Parker saying how a model was conceived with one purpose. WOAC really started with a focus on the shellfish industry and effects of ocean acidification to oysters and shellfish. But it has really gone beyond that. And we see that it's not just ocean acidification, it's also hypoxia, warming temperatures. And I don't know if you noticed, but Leonard Forsman really stressed the word system. And so that's what Washington OA Center has expanded to do, and really thinking about the system. And with respect to the biology, there's a couple of ways we do that. One is from field observations. This is, we call it a research cruise, but when you say you're going on a cruise, people think you're going on this luxury experience. But surveys of water chemistry, and you can see that the chemistry is being sampled at the exact same time as the zooplankton nectos are happening and the plankton are being collected. And so there's just a smattering of the samples that we take to really characterize the system and to really get at what's going on with the plankton. The second is that we're reaching out to a lot of partners, scientists who are doing different types of manipulations on various organisms, way beyond just what are the oysters responding to. So one is work with Chad Williams, sorry, I'm just going blank today, it seems, on Pacific salmon and looking at the neurosensory response. So finding that the salmon cannot smell the same because of the chemistry and how that changes in seawater. And so this was a really important revelation. It doesn't happen in black cod, and really trying to understand how Washington species are responding to OA. A second is Chase Williams, not Chad Williams. A second is our work on pteropods. These are tiny little planktonic organisms about the size of a pencil dot, and using the scanning electron microscopy that you see there to look at how these shells are being etched. And we're seeing very severe etching and in some cases shell dissolution to the point of having holes. And the third and last is looking at harmful algae using some innovative technology, environmental DNA, and then the standard practices to look at harmful algal blooms. And there's a nexus between harmful algal blooms and ocean acidification conditions. So we're exploring that. All of these have papers on our website, and we're really happy for you to explore those on your own and let us know if you have questions. I want to just shout out to our many partners whose organizations are listed here, but it's definitely a group effort and we couldn't do the work without everyone. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to stop sharing.
And wonderful. All right. So our next presenter is Harriet Morgan. Harriet is a researcher at the Climate Impacts Group, which this year is celebrating 25 years of building climate resilience. Today, Harriet is joining us to talk about a new online tool developed by the Climate Impacts Group that helps stormwater and wastewater managers in the Northwest to visualize projected changes in rainfall events so they can accurately design and operate with climate change in mind. Thank you, Harriet.
Great. Thanks, Constance. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Great. So today I'm going to be talking about how climate change is projected to influence heavy precipitation events. And specifically, I'm going to be highlighting an online tool that we co-developed with stormwater and wastewater engineers. So I'll start with this picture, which I think does an excellent job of illustrating some of the impacts that heavy rainfall events can have on our communities and the infrastructure that they rely upon. So back in December, on December 7th, back in 2015, just over 3.1 inches of rain fell on the city of Gresham down in Oregon over a 6-hour period. And this rainstorm caused a culvert to collapse and the road that was overlaying that culvert to split into two, which is what you can see on this screen. And here's a video that was taken downstream of the collapsed culvert and the split road. So this road is a major thoroughfare through the city of Gresham. It sees more than 35,000 cars per day and is also a primary access point for students who are attending the adjacent Mount Hood Community College. So this event obviously was a pretty serious disruption for the community in the city of Gresham, but I bring it up because I think it's a great example that unearths a larger challenge for climate resilience across Northwest communities, which is that the design of many infrastructure systems that are in our communities are based on the underlying assumption that heavy precipitation events are static or unchanging, that the heavy rainfall events in the future are going to look like the ones that we observed historically. And the challenge is that recent research has shown that heavy rainfall events are projected to become more intense with climate change. Now, this is an important statement because previous research on the topic has suggested very little projected change in heavy precipitation for the region. And what we've realized is that in order to get accurate heavy precipitation projections, we really need to use regional climate models to simulate local scale changes in climate. And so Cliff Mass at UW's Atmospheric Sciences Department recently produced an ensemble of regional climate model projections for the Pacific Northwest. And so that ensemble is sort of the basis of the projections that I'm talking about today and in our online tool that we developed. So what our results show is the potential for large increases in rainfall intensity. These results are going to differ by location where you are in the Pacific Northwest. They're going to vary by what metric you're looking at, what duration of rainstorm you're interested in, but generally they show larger projected changes in more extreme events. So for example, the projected change in the intensity of the 25-year event is larger than the projected change in the 2-year event. And our results also show that we have larger projected changes for shorter duration storms. So the changes are generally largest for the 1-hour duration rainstorms and are smallest for the longer durations like the 48-hour or the 72-hour durations. And we built an interactive visualization to help stormwater and wastewater engineers access, interpret, and use the projected changes in heavy precipitation events, and to help ensure that the visualization that we developed would actually be useful to and used by the decision-making community. We worked very closely and iteratively with staff at the City of Portland, City of Gresham, and Clackamas County down in Oregon to help ensure that the data was presented and accessible in a way that they were anticipating using it. So now I'm going to do a really quick walkthrough of the visualization. So this gold lattice that you see on the screen here represents the model domain that we're working from. And the first step to exploring the extreme precipitation projections is to select your grid cell of interest. So here you can see I'm zooming into the Portland area and I'm going to click on my grid cell of interest. Once I've selected my grid cell, the screen's going to change and the projections are going to populate on the graph on the right side of the screen. And this tool provides 3 different options for viewing results. And these are represented by the buttons that you see on the left side of the screen there. And with this selection, what you're doing is you're determining what metric you'd like to view on the x-axis of the plot to the right. So our default is to view the projections by duration, which you see here. If we look at our graph on the right, you see that duration is the metric that we're looking at on our x-axis. We have the 1-hour event all the way over to the 72-hour duration event. Y-axis, we're looking at the projections that are expressed as percent change relative to historical conditions, which we define to be between 1981 and 2010. We can also view the by return interval by selecting that button. Now you'll see that our x-axis metric has changed. We're looking at return interval from the 2-year event out to the 100-year event. And finally, we can view the projections by decade. So these are viewing the projected changes on decadal timestamps out through the end of the 21st century. And if you hover your cursor over one of the individual points, a tooltip will pop up, which provides the user with more detailed information about what each of those data points are actually saying for this specific WRF grid cell. And then finally, we've built in a variety of features to help end users communicate the results, whether that's downloading these figures or downloading the raw data themselves to enable them to make their own graphs as they see fit. And I'll close by saying, to help ensure that the data is reaching all decision makers who want to use or access this data, we leveraged our funds from the work that was funded by the 3 Western Oregon jurisdictions to expand the geographic scope of the tool. So this tool provides extreme precipitation projections across the entire domain, rather than just focusing on Western Oregon region. So we wanted to ensure that other jurisdictions were able to access and use the projections. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Harriet. Really appreciate you walking us through that new tool. So we are going to stick with SIG for the next presentation. And up next, we have Andrew Shirk. Andrew is a research scientist in conservation biology. He's here to talk to us about Terra Adapt, a spatial management tool that is used to help habitats and species be more resilient to climate change. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Constance, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm going to talk about Terra Adapt, and I have a wonderful team that's helping me develop this. I want to acknowledge straight up. So the premise here is that every day we're making local land use decisions about our lands that may have broader impacts on our region's ecosystems. We're expanding our cities, we're growing our industries, extracting natural resources like timber and building golf courses, and many other things. And these impacts, they need to go somewhere, right? And right now, the guidance influencing where they go is often driven by the characteristics at the site itself and some other local considerations. And so we have rules about, not developing on wetlands and cutting trees near streams, for example. But if you zoom out and look at where these site level impacts are occurring on the larger landscape, we often just don't have the kind of timely and spatially explicit information that's required to assess those broader impacts to the ecosystem. And we often don't have the mandate or the mechanism to incorporate those concerns into planning. When you look at the cumulative impacts of all those local decisions over the past few decades or so, you can see from these satellite images that we're rapidly transforming our planet. I mean, the pace of change that you see here is truly astounding. Our cities and farms and industries are expanding exponentially in many places, and our climate is changing rapidly too, which you can see as evidenced by these glaciers retreating in these images. Climate change is compelling many species to move potentially long distances at up to continental scales over very short timeframes to track suitable conditions. And other species, they're going to try to shelter in place, so to speak, and weather the storm within climatic refugia. These are areas where climate is changing more slowly. And by not accounting for these migration routes and refugia in our development plans, we could be creating migration barriers and degrading refugia without knowing it. And this is fueling, this lack of awareness really is fueling an extinction crisis for wildlife, both regionally in the Pacific Northwest and globally. These risks are what motivated our team to develop Terra Adapt. It's an automated and dynamic decision support system that helps provide a regional scale, climate smart perspective to local land use decisions. As changes occur across our region, they are detected by the growing constellation of Earth observing satellites. And Terra Adapt analyzes the satellite data and the climate data to assess impacts of land use and climate change on species and ecosystems of interest. It then provides continuously updated recommendations on where to protect critical habitats, migration corridors, and climatic refugia from development, and where to invest in restoration and mitigation projects to maximize ecosystem benefits. Terra Adapt is built using Google Earth Engine, which is a planetary scale platform for remote sensing and spatial analysis. And we've been very fortunate to have Google as a partner in this project. And so decision makers are connected to Terra Adapt via our web portal and an automated reporting and alert system, which provides them with the information they need to account for the broader impacts of their local land use decisions in their planning. And implementation of these plans drives new changes in the landscape that Terra Adapt can monitor and assess. And so this becomes a cycle. and potentially an adaptive management cycle where decision makers are continuously able to adapt their plans as conditions on the ground change. TerraDapt is currently in a prototype phase, but we're already starting to monitor our region's forests and other natural systems, track changes in land cover and our human footprint, model habitat for species like lynx, and project future habitat for wolverine given the impacts of climate change. We're co-developing TerraDapt with the Cascadia Partner Forum, which is a large transboundary conservation partnership among land managers and stakeholders in Washington and British Columbia. And we're working to integrate TerraDapt into the Partner Forum's climate adaptation strategy, which will provide the political and operational links between our tool and the land use decision-making across Cascadia. So you can learn more about our work at cascadiapartner.forum, cascadiapartnerforum.org, and feel free to reach out to me by email as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. All right, this is going pretty fast. So up next, you're going to hear from one of our innovation grant teams. I'm going to find them on the list here to spotlight their videos. We have Leanne Andrews, and we have Coco Alacorn, and we also have Kathleen Wolf. And so these trio of researchers are here to talk about one of our 2020 innovation grant projects. And there you are, Leah. There we go. Thank you, Leanne. We see your shared slide.
Okay, let's see if I can do this. Do you see only the shared slide? Okay.
Yes, and your
okay. Great. Well, thank you all for inviting us today. So I'm going to zip through this. So our project is called the Lessons from Urban Indigenous Immigrants, Integrated Social and Ecological Dynamics of Informal Communities, and it is based in Iquitos, Peru, which is a city in the Amazon rainforest. So I'm just highlighting the fact that we have a very robust team across many disciplines. Kathy, Coco, and myself are talking, but we actually have others who are on this call as well who are part of the team, and on those who are unable to make it, Peruvian team members as well as community partners. Coco?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So our site is the Amazon rainforest, largest rainforest in the planet, home of 10% of the known species and home of 33 million people. It is estimated that in the 1900s, around 1,000 ethnic groups were living in the Amazon basin. And nowadays, there are only 350. So we lost 2/3 of the ethnic groups in this area. The communities that are living here, they are survivors of 200 years of colonization and exploitation of people and nature in this environment. The same forces that trigger the extinction of these communities are still pushing the survivors to the oblivion. Violence and institutional violence related to drugs, logging, mining, oil extraction are pushing them away from their homes. The need of health, education, and economic opportunities are also strong motivation for native displacement. Next, please. However, the closest cities do not welcome these communities that easily. In the case of Peru, in Iquitos, is the largest city in the Amazon basin, in the Peruvian Amazon basin. The lack of land, housing programs, and urban development plans pushing native communities outside the borders of the city. Many times these communities have to adapt to the living on the river. Some of these communities, such as the community of Collaboratory, are prosper. Others, such as Belen, like the one in the picture, are forced to adapt to regulations that doesn't have any sense for these conditions. And the government doesn't have a plan until 4 years ago, that they start to think, what should we do with these communities? And they're trying to relocate them in other areas away from the city. affecting other ecosystems. For example, there is a new development called New Belen that is being built in an ecological buffer of a national park without any connection to health systems, education, infrastructure. Next one. So our project is going to study and compare 3 of these communities. Amphibious communities that maintain traditional practices, such as Collaboratory at the left, compared to those incentivized to have lifestyles that lessen traditional practices, example Belen, the one in the center, and compared to those who were forced to relocate away from the context that support traditional practices, for example, New Belen, the one at the right. We think that it's more likely to have a stronger connections to their environment, which turns to support higher ecological and human health in the communities that are keeping the traditions. Another goal that we have is the government relocation program, New Belen, does not provide better ecological and human health outcomes than the amphibious communities, Belen and Collaboratory. And therefore, we think that alternative solutions are necessary.
So really quickly, so we are very much at in the throes of the project, perhaps in the beginning throes of the project. But our methods are multidisciplinary, reflecting the team that we're engaging as well as the community that we're engaging. So we have this goal of co-creating a project together between our disciplines and with community members, and having wrapping in a community science and engagement and training program. We're still trying to figure out exactly how that works, but we're in the throes of that. In terms of our methods, these are our methods outlined to the left. It's very diverse, going anywhere from physical documentation of environmental conditions, doing biodiversity to understand the ecological and the ecosystem health, as well as survey and cognitive mapping to capture perceptual elements of nature. And we also have a bioethnographic photography, which isn't technically a research method, but it's part of the storytelling that we are doing. And we're comparing across the 3 communities that Coco mentioned, and in different seasons. We have a high river season and a low river season. The product that is going to come out of this is some sort of online platform, or perhaps physical advocacy book and a gallery exhibit that will display this co-created scientific outcomes with drawings and ethnographic photography together alongside each other as a display of the co-creation of the project. And we'll be sharing that with the communities, the government and other influencers, to provide a different perspective to those relocation efforts for them as an advocacy tool, and then also the public in Iquitos and perhaps Seattle. So where we're at right now, we finished the first part of what we're calling the bio-team measures. We did those in the fall of last year, and we have started the second round of measures. So one is in the low water season, and one is the high water season. And we piloted our community engagement. We're hoping to really launch the community engagement once it's safe for things to reopen. But we have been continually delaying the social components of it just for health and safety purposes. Kathy?
I'll wrap up here with some lessons and learning. One is the pivots due to the pandemic have been extensive. This is a socio-ecological integrated project, and the biological ecological work has proceeded fairly well. The social, there have been limitations. So we're adapting to that as best we can. The research dynamics is we're not only learning about this community, this place and the situation, but also our respective disciplines. And we're also bringing to that, we're leveraging our privilege in a way that I had not anticipated or really understood, but we're bringing our skills, our education, this interdisciplinary team to purposes that we hope will engage communities and engage the local government in a way to better understand how to create place for people. Story is very important in our work. And that is story that we develop through our data collection, but it is more importantly, perhaps, story of people. So the photographic element of this, an ethnographic photographer to chronicle and display the richness of not only the biological element of this project, but the social element as well. It's a rewarding and enriching experience for all of us. And we hope for this informal settlement as well. I think what we learned here will benefit not only these communities around Iquitos, but perhaps other informal settlements in many other locations around the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am really looking forward to following this project over the next year. Thank you. So next, we have 3 more presentations to go. Our next presentation is from Dr. Jeremy Hess. He's an emergency medical doctor and a professor at the UW Center for Health and the Global Environment, which we call Change, and Change is EarthLab's newest member organization. So Jeremy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Constance. I'm very excited to be EarthLab's newest organizational member, and I'm going to be talking with you about work that we are doing recently funded by the UW Population Health Initiative to build a Collaboratory, which is a joint effort between Change and Front and Center, which is a coalition of environmental justice organizations around Washington, to envision resilience and a just transition in our movement forward around climate change mitigation. And I had hoped to be joined by one of my colleagues and co-investigators, Esther Min, with whom I'm working closely on this project, but unfortunately she wasn't available. So we all know, as we've heard in several of the presentations today, that we've got some pretty significant challenges already, and many of them are poised to get worse. Graduates from the UW right now over the course of their professional lifetimes are likely to see pretty dramatic shifts in Washington's environment of warming, perhaps of 8 degrees, and certainly more wildfires and wildfire exposures, exposures to hazardous smoke, and lots of impacts on our productive ecosystems. So we know and are starting to embrace the need to transition to renewable energy very quickly in Washington state. And we know that there's a lot of inequity in terms of environmental health impacts in Washington. And this is work that Esther pioneered in conjunction with the Department of Health and Front and Center. They developed a map of environmental health disparities, and then Esther and I and SIG worked with the Department of Health to develop a cumulative impacts assessment of fossil fuel pollution and a preliminary assessment of climate change health impacts for the CETA-CIA. And it's very clear that all of this work and investments in climate change mitigation need to address inequity, because there's really stark inequity around environmental health in Washington state. And those communities that are most impacted have an average life expectancies that's 6 years shorter than those communities that are least impacted by these disparities. We also know that based on the experience we've seen with cap and trade laws in California, that there's a systematic bias in how benefits from mitigation activities are distributed across communities. And one of the people working on the Collaboratory is Julian Marshall. He and his other members of his lab recently published a really important paper highlighting that no matter where and no matter what the emission source, there's a systematic bias against people of color in terms of health impacts of emissions. And we know that the health co-benefits of mitigation activities need to be really actively managed in order to be appropriately distributed and to go against that systematic bias. And so we've developed a shared approach to address this. We work closely with Front and Center to identify their member organizations' policy priorities, and we turn those policy priorities into scenarios that we then use to do health impact assessment analyses. And we feed back that data, or the plan will be to feed that data back to Front and Center, that its member organizations, and also to our legislators, so that they can make sure that the just transition that we all envision actually comes to fruition. And all stories have a hero, and the heroes in this case are the communities and the members in Front and Center. They're the ones who are articulating the vision. They're the ones who are going to be holding the state and our industries to account as we move forward. And we are lucky and gratified to be joining them in supporting this effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Wow, another project I am so excited to follow over the next year. So in keeping with the change theme, up next, you will hear from Chris Ebi, who was the founding director of Change. She's an epidemiologist whose primary focus is the impact of global warming on human health. And she is here to talk to us about a recent paper called Burning Embers, Synthesis of Health Risks of the synthesis of health risks of climate change. Chris, do you need me to share the screen or do you have it?
No, that would be really helpful. My internet connection's very unstable. So
not a problem.
That would be so much
it.
easier.
Yes. And so how does that look?
That looks great. Why don't we just go to my real slide? And that's my only slide. And thank you everybody for your interest. Today I'm talking about a process that's been used for quite a few years through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It started actually with the signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. When you look at that document, Article 2 of the document gives you the reason the document was created. It's the reason for the UNFCCC, and that is to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Dangerous, of course, is not a scientific term, it's a social term. And how each of us view danger varies. Some people think skydiving is not dangerous, and there's people who think skydiving is dangerous. The UNFCCC turned to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and said, could you help us? In the third assessment report that came out in 2001, there's a chapter that focused on how to think about framing this question. And it came up with what are called reasons for concern about danger, anthropogenic interference with the climate system, and then assessed the literature on the 5 reasons for concern to see how the risks for each of these reasons for concern could change with additional climate change. The figure associated with that is very similar to what you see here, is a set of figures where you go from 0, and in my case, to 4 degrees C above pre-industrial. The 0 line is pre-industrial. And the question is then how risks shift. And first of all, you can see the colors are white to gold to red to purple. And just because of what these figures look like visually, they're called the burning embers, and they've been called the burning embers since 2001. And as the burning embers have evolved over time, it's moved beyond just the reasons for concern, which are aggregate risks, into risks for particular sectors and even within sectors. And the paper that was just published looks individually at some of the issues around the health risks of a changing climate. And as you look at these, you can see that there's 6 of them, starting in the upper left with heat-related morbidity and mortality. The colors start at white, and when the color is white, it means that there is no way we can scientifically determine if heat-related morbidity and mortality has changed. You look at change from a baseline. Have we seen changes in morbidity and mortality? When there's white, it may have changed. We don't know. We haven't been able to measure it. We haven't done detection and attribution. When the color goes to yellow, it means that, in fact, there has been a shift within the sector, within the system, and at least some of that change can be attributable to climate change. When the color turns to red, it means that the risks are widespread and severe. And then purple is a place we really don't want to go to. It's a very severe and very widespread risks. And you can see then for each of these 6 health outcomes of a changing climate, climate-sensitive health issues, part of what we did in the paper is we also moved forward on asking the question of how much could adaptation adjust the risks out into the future. These are based on the shared socioeconomic pathways. There's work within Change that we've been doing for several years on what do the SSPs, the shared socioeconomic pathways, mean for health systems. When you look at each of these figures, the paper, which was published in Environmental Research Letters just a couple of months ago, has 75 pages of supplementary material. We went through all of the publications that project changes in these 6 different climate-sensitive health outcomes. We then used expert judgment because there's very few projections that looked at different adaptation scenarios to say, how could those risks be adjusted? When you look at the 3 figures for heat-related morbidity and mortality, the one on the left is SSP3. This is a world that breaks into large world regions where there's very high challenges to adaptation and to mitigation. The figure in the middle of that set is SSP2. It's a world that continues to muddle through. We do some things well, do other things not so well. We eventually get there most of the time, a lot like today, basically. And the figure on the right is SSP1, and this is a world aiming to sustainable development. The number of dots tell you how high the confidence was in each of the transitions between the colors. And so you can see for heat-related morbidity and mortality, very high confidence in the transitions from non-detectable to detectable, that climate change has affected that particular system. And you can see we conducted this for heat-related morbidity and mortality, ozone, malaria, diseases carried by Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, Lyme disease, and West Nile fever. We did not do this for other health outcomes because there's so few projections, we didn't really have confidence in constructing burning embers for these. We really look forward to having more publications, more work done in this area. So in fact, we can start constructing more of these embers. These embers are very useful to decision makers. The negotiators, the focal points for the IPCC typically are from ministries of the environment. They're very used to looking at the burning embers. They've seen these in lots of IPCC reports, and they use them to communicate how much risk is changing, how urgent and immediate it is to both mitigate and to adapt. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to listening to Fiona.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, last but certainly not least, we have Fiona Lowe. I'm going to add her spotlight here. And Fiona is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, and she is a member of Change. She is interested in how climate impacts human health, and her most recent work involves forecasting pollen to help allergy patients manage their symptoms. So thank you, Fiona.
Thanks. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes to both.
Great. So I'm Fiona Lowe. I'm with the Center for Health and Global Environment. And today I'll be summarizing some of the work I've been doing with Dr. Jeremy Hess on predicting pollen for allergy management. So if you suffer from hay fever or pollen allergies, you're in pretty good company because up to about 30% of the US population suffers from allergies. And this has a significant health and financial burden. And in addition to that, there's some indirect costs associated with this, such as lower work productivity, adverse school performance, and poor sleep. And with climate change, this will exacerbate allergy symptoms because there's been studies that have shown that warmer temperatures with climate change will lengthen the pollen season and increase pollen concentrations. And then there have been lab studies that have also shown that increasing CO2 results in increased pollen production and pollen potency. So unfortunately, you can't cure allergies, but they can be successfully treated. And the two main methods of treatment are pre-treatment with medications, which is taking medications before symptoms occur, because once symptoms are in full force, it takes stronger medications to get it under control. And the second one is pollen avoidance. And some of these strategies are a little less extreme than in this cartoon, but they include things like staying indoors and keeping windows closed. And both these treatments work best if we have knowledge beforehand of where, when, and how much pollen will be in the air. So what we've done is developed a model to forecast pollen. So this pollen model, we've included environmental variables into the model because we know that they affect the amount of pollen in the air. And there are two ways they can do this. First, they can affect the development of the plant and contribute to the readiness to flower. These are variables such as temperature, precipitation, and sunlight. And once the plant is ready to flower, the environmental variables can determine when the pollen is released, how far it travels, and how long it remains in the air. And generally, warm, sunny, dry, and windy days are correlated to high pollen, and rainy and humid days with low pollen. So what we've done is we've developed a framework of machine learning random forest models to predict daily pollen concentrations. And from these models, we can forecast a couple of important things for allergy sufferers. The start date of the pollen season, because pre-treatment is important, and many of the commonly used medications take a couple weeks to be fully effective. So we've developed a 14-day forecast of the start of the pollen season. We can also forecast days of high pollen concentration. And these are the days that are likely to affect most of the people that are sensitized to pollen and to cause the most severe allergy symptoms. So we've developed a 1 to 3 day forecast so people can make plans and prepare to avoid being exposed to pollen. And we can also use these models to make long-term projections from climate model data. And these projections can help public health with long-term planning and education. And in addition to forecasting, these models can also increase the spatial and temporal resolution of the pollen data. So unfortunately, right now, the pollen data available in the US is pretty sparse. About 20 of the 48 20 of the 48 states in the continental US do not have stations, and often the stations do not collect data on weekends or in the winter. Pollen counting is time consuming and identification requires training, so it's not easy to add more observation stations. So our models can predict pollen for days with missing pollen observations. And they can also use nearby stations for the model to predict pollen for locations without pollen observations. And by increasing the spatial temporal resolution, we can have more complete data for better analysis and better models. And this in turn translates to improved health outcomes. So our next steps are to continue improving the pollen model, in particular the spatial extent, which means predicting beyond neighboring regions of a pollen station. We also are in the middle of developing climate indicators of pollen, and we want to operationalize the short-term forecast by partnering with end users to produce an early warning system for allergy medication, allergy management. And I want to thank all our pollen data providers for giving us this hard to get pollen data. And thank you for sticking around listening to my talk. And my email is at the bottom if you'd like to contact me with questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And thank you everybody for being here today. We are a little over time. There's obviously no way we can fit all of the work happening in the EarthLab universe into 1 hour. I especially want to thank all of our speakers here today, Leo, Jan, Harriet, Andrew, Leanne, Coco, Kathleen, Jeremy, Chris, and Fiona for sharing just a peek at some of your work. And I would also like to thank my colleagues, Jessica and Anastasia, for your assistance running this event today. Finally, I would love to thank our audience for your support and curiosity. We invite you to stay connected to EarthLab by visiting our news and events page or by signing up for our newsletters. And we will see you all next time. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Constance.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Invitation.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.